welcome to Accountants Europe's webinar towards digital corporate reporting with CSRD. My name is Harun Saki, and I'm the head of audit and assurance at Accountants Europe. We unite 50 professional organizations from 35 countries that represent about 1 million accountants, auditors, and advisors. In December last year, the EU policymakers reached an agreement on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, to support the EU's ambitions related to Green Deal, which includes making Europe the first climate neutral economy by 2050. With the CSRD, around 50,000 companies will be disclosing sustainability information in their management reports in accordance with the European sustainability reporting standards. They will be filing these reports in a digital, machine-readable format. The CSRD also requires independent assurance on sustainability reporting. Digital reporting and assurance have already been in place for annual financial reports with SF, European Single Electronic Format, in European member states. The member states are now in the process of CSRD transposition. And we wanted to support this implementation effort by bringing together experts from various stakeholders. I'd like to thank in advance to the speakers of today for their time and insights. Before getting started, please note that the event is being recorded and will be made available on our webpage as well as on YouTube. For your questions, please use Slido, either by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen now, or simply by typing #digital on www.slido.com. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Willem Heitenberg, Digital Reporting Thought Leader at PwC Netherlands and the Chair of Accountants Europe's Corporate Reporting Digitalization Task Force, who will be kicking off the discussion. Willem, may I hand over to you?
Thank you, Harun, and welcome everybody, also from my side. We're very glad to see many of you taking an interest in this topic. As Accountancy Europe, we have noted that the uptake of digital reporting in the various EU reporting requirements now overlaps or starts to overlap, and that necessitates a response from the profession, at the very least disseminating the relevant knowledge, but also trying to kickstart some initiatives to make sure that we as professionals are ready to respond to whatever digital reporting requires of us. So without much further ado, what is digital reporting? Because it's been discussed widely for a number of years, but few people actually discuss the topic itself. So I think it's good, before we go further, to have a brief description of what it is and what it isn't. First, what it isn't. A report in PDF format is not digital reporting. It is a paper-based report in a digital representation. So what we mean by digital reporting in this context is a report that can be interpreted in some way by a computer. So that means that the report is not only intended for human consumption, but also for machine consumption, computer consumption, software consumption. There are two variants of digital reporting. You have the so-called hybrid reporting, digital reporting, which is reports which are like ASEF, intended for both human consumption and machine readable consumption. And then there are the pure digital reports, which are reports in the pure, usually the pure XBRL format, which cannot readily be used and read by human beings, but are solely intended for computer consumption. And an example of that is the reports sent to the central banks by financial institutions in Europe. Those are pure XBRL reports, and if you really have a look at them, you can't make sense of them. You really need report generators to be able to see what's in them. So you have these two types of reports, but the common denominator is that the content of the report can be read and interpreted by a computer. Another aspect here is that it's usually being set out or being made, this digital report, by the use of an external framework, usually in the form of something called a taxonomy, which is a digital definition file of what the report should or could look like. I won't go into that much further, but it's a topic which is important, because the quality of this digital framework is to a large degree a driver for the quality of the report itself that you produce using this framework. Now, in the final aspect of digital reporting that I want to mention here, that it replaces a paper-based report. That's the context in which we use it here. So it actually has a formal status. Digital reporting in some way has been around for a long time, but usually the digital reports being used there were derivatives of paper-based reporting, where the paper-based reports were still the official report, and the digital equivalent was used as a kind of a mechanism to ease the consumption of the contents of the report, but it did not have a formal status. The digital reporting that we are discussing here has a formal status. So sometimes there are still paper-based derivatives of that of digital report, but they are not official. And ASEF is, I think, the most important example of that. In the introduction of that standard, the Commission made it very clear that they regarded the ASEF, the digital ASEF file, as the primary, the official report, and anything else was an unofficial copy. So that is important to note. Now, some excuse me. Now something on Accountancy Europe. As Harun mentioned, the digitalization task force of Accountancy Europe keeps a close eye on these developments. And these developments now gave rise to this workshop. The reason that we have done that, because we saw a number of developments overlapping, and I will briefly touch upon them because the speakers after me will go into more detail. Okay, the first aspect, the first development I already mentioned is the ESEF, the European Structured Electronic Format, which has been in operation for 2 years now, and that mandates the digitalization of the annual reports of listed entities in Europe. CSRD is also mentioned. That's the main driver. Everybody's talking about that now. That has a digital component. But the other component that I want to mention here, the third component, has less attention so far, and that's called the European Single Access Point, which is basically a repository of corporate reporting across Europe, intended to increase the transparency of the European, not only the financial markets, but just the corporate markets. So to see in more detail how the markets operate. And that is an important aspect of or mechanism behind the Green Deal. And ASAP goes much further than ESEF. ESEF is just for listed entities. CSRD goes further in its scope, but ESEF goes even further. So these three drivers are the reason for us to have this webinar with you and to discuss some topics which stem from that. So without much further ado, I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Eduardo Javier Prieto.
Thank you very much. I will share my presentation. Can you see?
Yes, we can see it, Eduardo.
Okay. Cannot see it now. Now, so I will try to be quick because I think I don't have so much time. So I will start speaking a bit about what is the role of ESMA in corporate financial digital reporting, corporate digital reporting. Then a bit of the enforcement activities that our national competent authorities has done last year. A bit of feedback on the block tagging requirements that entered into force last year, and finally I will give a bit of an overview on the next steps, and particularly in ESMA. So what is the role of ESMA in corporate digital reporting? Well, ESMA is mandated by the Transparency Directive to develop and to define the ESEF, the European Single Electronic Format, and is the electronic format to be used by issuers whose securities are admitted to trading on the EU regulated markets, to prepare the annual financial reports in digital format in order to help facilitate the accessibility, analysis, and comparability. And I think this is one of the key reasons of why we are talking about digital reporting. What ESEF requires is that all annual financial reports needs to be provided in XXTML, which is a human readable format and can be opened with a standard web browser. And then when the annual financial reports contains IFRS consolidated financial statements, these are to be marked up with the labels containing the SF taxonomy that William was referring, using this inline XBRL, and which transform these financial reports in machine readable, because they will be able to extract these labels including taxonomy. So ESMA develops this taxonomy based on the IFRS taxonomy, which adopts and extends this taxonomy. And what it's going to do is something similar with the CSRD. So because until now this was referring to annual financial report, but the CSRD also requires a mandate to ESMA to extend these requirements contained in the SFRTS to the sustainability information. So it means that the management report will be an XTML, which is this human readable on a standard web browser, and the sustainability report will need to be developed or produced in inline XBRL, including as well the Article 8 taxonomy regulation disclosures. For that reason, the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards taxonomy, is being developed by EFRAG, and what ESMA will do is to take this, to adapt and include and extend as necessary in the SFRTS, just to make it mandatory at European level. On top of this, this is what is the legal mandate from ESMA, but additionally, ESMA members, our national competent authorities, securities regulators, check compliance with the SF requirements and enforce these SF requirements, as well as how this the SFRTS has been implemented and this taxonomy has been used according to the SFRTS. So for the reason, what we did last year, well, every year ESMA produce an activity report, an enforcement activity report. And last year, it was the first year that we included a section on SF, because the 2022 corporate reporting enforcement activity report refers to the 2021 annual financial reports. And this is the first year of mandatory implementation in all member states of the SF requirements for the primary financial statements. So, and high level, there is two main differences. First, what we refer to, and maybe this is just for the nomenclature, what we refer to the Transparency Directive high-level requirements are those requirements, SF requirements, that refers to all annual financial reports, and in particular refers to the file extension of the file, the content of the XML file, checks on checks of whether there are biases, active content, non-conformant names, and also the timeliness of the presentation of the official version. And then this is for the all annual financial reports, including the consolidated ones, but only for the consolidated financial reports that they are produced in SF, in XBRL with taxonomy. They include an additional requirements to check validations against the iXBRL specifications or compliance with the ESMA conformance suite, as well as the completeness and correctness of the tagging. So the outcome of these examinations, you can see here that the ESMA members and CA, securities regulators, did around 56% on examination rate of all applicable issuers. Most of them is referring to annual financial reports, including IFRS, which means this consolidated financial statements, which includes XML plus iXBRL. And this includes European, third countries, and also on a voluntary basis. And then there are a small group, around 25%, regarding to only individual annual financial reports. From this examination, you see that the actions that they were taken by the enforcement actions that they were taken by the enforcers, by national competent authorities, it was around 10%, and it was mostly focused regarding the resubmission and redissemination of information. It means that they were requiring issuers to resubmit this information due to errors. There was 24 regarding the correction in the future, to include a correction note in the future annual financial reports, and also one on the public notes. There was also other measures that were not formally speaking, or not formal, like letters submitted to the issuers, to the preparers in relation about the timeless, that it was, whether it was complying with time or not, and whether it was clear that it was the official version, that we made clear in the last version of the SF reporting manual that only the SF annual financial report is the valid annual financial report, and also reminders about the other requirements. So regarding in this area, the errors that were most commonly found, it was these erroneous file extensions, around 44%, followed by this late publication, because it was forcing it to make clear that what was necessary to be presented, it was the SF format, not the PDF files or any other file, formats. And also this the point about the perception of the financial report as official or not, and in some cases as well the content of the XHTML. In relation to the CSRD requirements, the granular requirements I was referring before, that refers only to the XBRL requirements for the consolidated financial statements, there is a differentiation between the technical and the accounting examinations. The technical examinations refers to the validations against the XBRL specifications, compliance with ESMA conformance suite, and the accounting examinations refer most about the use of the tagging, how the policy approach defined by ESMA has been done, whether it was complete, whether it was correct or not, whether there was a consistency in the use of this tagging and the use of the taxonomy elements. So here you see that the examination rate was up to 25%, with around 1,000 listed issuers on consolidated financial statements. And only, of course, we can see that it's referring to the unfinancial reports containing IFRS consolidated financial statements. In this case, the action rate went down, mostly as well because it was the first year of implementation and the enforcers took an educational approach. So instead of going directly for enforcement actions, there was more about education and about improving the way of reporting. And there was only requirements of resubmission and correction in the future with some non-formal enforcement actions. In relation of the errors that were identified, you can see here that most of them, it was a high level, it was this technical and software validations that I was referring before. And also a high level, it was about the use of the tags, about the correctness, about the completeness of this tagging. So before moving to the next slide and the block tagging, I can also say that for the first year of implementation, the perception that it was taken by the enforcers and the feedback that we have receiving is that the use of SF requirements and the annual financial report with SF requirements, it was quite positive. There are still elements to be improved, especially regarding missing calculation or sign errors, the values with the wrong signs. But generally speaking, I think that it was quite positive. In the second stage, we have these block tagging requirements that there is no proper reinforcement for the time being. That has been done last year, 2022 financial year. So now is when we are receiving the financial reports. And this year it was when enforcers will do the enforcement activities. But we have already received some kind of feedback from different market players saying about what is the experience for the block tagging to the notes. Because as you know, detail tagging refers to the primary financial statement and block tagging refers to the notes which enter into force in 2022. So what we are receiving information is that is technically complex, that is burdensome, that might be improved, also issues about comparability. And in particular, there are two issues that has been flagged to us, is about the render information, whether this information in the block tags, in the block text is rendered in the text block tags, and whether it's human readable or not. In particular, when these block tags are contains quite a lot of information, and when there is a combination between tables and text, and also when there is a transformation between PDF into HTML. And the other point, it was the number of tags requires and this multi-tagging or nested tagging. But sometimes it was also burdensome, and sometimes the information when you extract it is not so valuable. So all this makes questioning the added value of the block taggings and the need to maybe to revisit the way that it's done and to see how this could be improved. Nevertheless, we are still in the process of gathering all the information and to see what are the areas that is necessary to be checked. So it's an area that we need to do, but we need to see how we are going to do it. And this drives me to the next steps, and it's about what ESMA is going to do regarding SF, CSRD, and ESA. So regarding SF, you know that we do these annual updates of the SFRTS to include the IFRS accounting taxonomy update. However, I would like to bring to your attention that last week, ESMA has made public that this year we are not going to update the SFRTS to reflect the IFRS taxonomy update 2023, that we are going to postpone this amendment to 2024, and we are going to merge the update to IFRS taxonomy 2023 with 2024, and that we are going to focus on improving on how is doing the implementation, how can be improved, how can we make best use of this digital corporate reporting, and how can be best done, in particular in relation to the block tag, and how we are going to gather information, and we are going to see what could be improved. Additionally to this, we are also going to do the necessary update of the SFRTS to include the mandate containing the CSRD to have this SFRTS with a sustainability taxonomy to allow the digitalization of the sustainability report. In this regard, and this is based on on EFRAG timeline, and is with the disclaimer that is according to our information. So we are going to work as we are doing with we have been doing with IFRS. So EFRAG is developing the ESRS taxonomy, and our understanding is that it might be published this month, the publication. So we will be looking into the taxonomy of the ESRS taxonomy, and we will start doing the preparatory work for ESMA, because once this is delivered to ESMA, that is planned by the end of September, is when ESMA will need to include, and we will need to see how we are going to adapt this SFRTS into, this ESRS taxonomy into the SFRTS, whether we need to extend it, whether we need to introduce some changes, whether we need to allow extensions, whether we want to have separate taxonomies or do it like a module or entry point into the SFRTS. So, but we will discuss, we are internally discussing all these points, and we will do a public consultation. We are not going to amend the SFRTS without making a change, and we will do a public consultation to collect views, and then we will provide the final report. We will include all this, and we will amend as necessary, and we will provide the draft final SFRTS to the Commission for the approval, and we will be developing the XBRL files for the delivery, with the goal that, as is currently in the CSRD, to be applicable for the financial years 2024. However, as I said before, this depends on the timeline as well of EFRAG. So this is for the for the work that we are doing. And also another point that I wanted to bring to your attention is the ESAP work that is currently in trialogues. We expect that there will be an adoption of the proposals this month or next month, at least during the Swedish presidency, council presidency. There's quite an agreement right now. There are still some open points, but we hope that we'll be able to be finalized by this presidency. And I think it will be a win change, personally, of the digital market, of the digital information, because the purpose of this ESAP, the European Single Access Point, that will be established by ESMA, is to have this centralized access of all the information that is currently in more than 36 legal acts, 15 directives, and 21 regulations. And I think there might be, in addition, following the trialogues, there might be a new legal acts that, like MiCA, DORA, or the green bonds, that will be also added into these data flows. So ESMA will be establishing this central point for accessing all this information, with the goal to provide more visibility to the companies, to open it up for sources of financing, and also to provide more information about the sustainability information. So furthermore, all this information will be free for access, and they will be free for use and reuse of information. I think what's important to make the point here is what is not ESAP, because sometimes more than what is to manage expectation. Is like, what will ESMA not be? And I think what is important to see is that ESMA will not be, ESAP will not be a new database. It's going to be just a centralization of the information that will be collected by the collection bodies. Will not create new additional requirements. It's already what is already included in the legal acts. the public information that is already required to be disclosed by different players, market players, and there will not be additional assurance requirements. So here you can see how it will work. So in the low part, you see all the reporting entities that will be transmitting this information to what is called in the ESAP proposals collection bodies. These collection bodies can be currently the OEMs, that is for the Transparency Directive, for the annual financial reports, will be OEMs, but will be also NCAs, will be also the ISA, CBA, ESMA, IOPA, and will be other business registers. And all of these collection bodies will be connected to ESMA, which will be established in the ESAP. And this is some of the most principal features is that the connection will be done through APIs to collect this information from the collection bodies to ESMA, and also ESMA with the users to facilitate all this information. There will be a user-friendly portal with translation services, notification services. There will be a qualified electronic seals to guarantee to verify this information. And the idea is to have for this information easy searchable. There will be metadata in order to be able to connect all the different data flows in relation to the metadata. For example, one of them will be the LEI, which means that if you search by the LEI, you will have all the information in relation to this LEI. And I think I already went a bit far from my time, so I will stop here and I will give the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Eduardo, for your extensive and detailed but very insightful full presentation. It's always good to see authorities outlining in more detail what they're working on, because that's very helpful for us as professionals, but also for our clients. So thank you again, and we are looking forward to further collaborating with you in future. So without much further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Richard Bussen on behalf of EFRAG, who will go into more detail of the taxonomy consultations for the ESRS and other relevant issues. Richard?
Thank you very much. First of all, welcome everybody. Yeah, it's a pleasure for me to introduce you to the EFRAG ESRS Expert Taxonomy project and to give you an update on what we are doing. For those of you, I will not spend a lot of time now introducing EFRAG and the CSRD or the ESRS. So for those of you that have never heard it, can you please go to the next slide? Just a very quick overview. The ESRS is a sustainability reporting standard that is being developed by EFRAG on behalf of the European Commission. And it's actually a standard that covers a wide range of sustainability topics, environmental topics like the climate change, pollution, water and marine resources, biodiversity, resources and circular economy, but also social standards like own workforce, workers in the value chain, and so on. And last but not least, G1, of course. There are also two general disclosure standards, E1 and E2, that are cross-connected to the actual topical standards that we have in the ESRS. And this standard is available as a draft on the EFRAG web page. It has been handed over to the European Commission in November 2022, and it's publicly available. So when you go to the next slide, please, you can see there are indeed even links in the slide, so you can directly go to the corresponding page on the EFRAG webpage to look at this. And as already mentioned before, the reporting with this sustainability reporting standard is required as per the CSRD. And the CSRD also requires to actually have a digital tagging, a digital markup of the sustainability statements. And hence at EFRAG, we are developing an XBRL taxonomy as well. And yeah, I would like to show you how we actually do this translation. The project is still ongoing. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of a delay. Can you please go to the next slide? Thanks. We have a little bit of a delay, so the X-ray taxonomy will not be published in May, but soon. And as I mentioned, we are developing the X-ray taxonomy, but not only the ESRS X-ray taxonomy. IFRAC got also the special task of developing the Article 8 X-ray taxonomy. It's usually considered as to be the EU taxonomy reporting, and not to be confused, because the term taxonomy is used twice here, once for XBRL taxonomy and once for the EU taxonomy, which is a classification system. But those disclosure requirements are going to be implemented in a separate XBRL taxonomy as well. So we consider both to be a package of EU sustainability reporting taxonomies, or one taxonomy in the end, one package. And there is a paper available. It's called Draft ESRS Taxonomy Methodology and Architecture. It is being published on the IFRAC webpage as part of the SRTAG meeting from the 17th of April. You can find it on the IFRAC webpage, or just click on the link below. And there is a very detailed description of how we are actually building the XBRL taxonomy here at IFRAC. And there are different considerations that we, of course, have to do. And I will demonstrate you, instead of now going through all the details of this paper, in one example, how the XBRL taxonomy has been built for one specific disclosure requirement from the ESRS. Next slide, please. This is one disclosure requirement on the left side. It's a screenshot from the PDF with the ESRS 2 standard, and it's about the market position, strategy, business models, and value chain, SBM1. So each disclosure requirement gets its own code, little code, that you can easily identify it. And then as like probably any human readable reporting standard, it has paragraph numbers, and you can find more information what exactly has to be disclosed. It starts with a general description. The undertaking shall disclose its market positions, the elements of its strategy that relate to or impact sustainability matters, its business models, and its value chain. And then it goes further and gives more detailed explanation on how it has to be reported, what exactly has to be considered or included when disclosing a statement. And as you can see on the right side, here's a little glimpse into the XBRL taxonomy that has not been published yet. How we have actually translated it. So we are starting with a text block tag for the whole disclosure requirement, and then each and every paragraph is translated into a text block tag as well in the tree hierarchy, as you can see here. But of course, not only text block tags, but also numerical disclosures like the number of employees, headcount, also broken down, for instance, by geographical area, or the revenue, which is supposed to be broken down in both by sector, is implemented as individual separate tags in the XBRL taxonomy. That was our most important methodology. Whenever we have numerical items defined in the ESRS, we of course translate it to numerical tags in the XBRL taxonomy. That will, of course, not only be monetary items, but rather also greenhouse gas emissions, water consumption, energy consumption, production, and so on. Many different data types that we haven't seen so far in ESF reports. Yeah, also, when you look below, there's a little icon. It's red and green. It's indicating a Boolean tag, which means yes, no question, actually, that can be answered in the inline XBRL document. And those kinds of tags, they're existing as well in the XBRL taxonomy, and it is part of the methodology to implement them as well. Regarding the text block tags, and you might see that we have quite a granular text block tagging in the XBRL taxonomy. It must be noted, and this is also part of our methodology note, that in theory, it is actually not required to report the whole hierarchy, as long, for instance, as the granular level is tagged. So the most granular text block tags are assigned to a disclosure in a human readable report. There's no need, if the whole content of the disclosure requirement is already tagged with the granular text, to also tag the parent text. Yeah, that is very important because it might be a chance to reduce the nesting of the text block tagging. And yeah, because it is fine to digitize the information only once from my point of view. Yeah. However, we are building the full comprehensive XBRL taxonomy with all those levels. And in the end is then ESMA's decision to actually implement the taxonomy, put it into legislation, and define the tagging granularity and the tagging rule as part of the RTS and the ASEF rule, under which the taxonomy has to be applied. Yes, there are also many other considerations. One might also ask now, why are you focusing so much on the narrative disclosures here? Yeah, and that's indeed an interesting question. And you must note that the ESRS, and I highly recommend everybody to have a look at the standards itself, yeah, to get an impression what the ESRS are sustainability statements, and the require sustainability statement, and the sustainability statements are in many cases of a narrative character. So this is actually different to the notes to the financial statements, where the notes itself are explanatory information, usually to the main financial statements. So the notes are explanation, context information to the monetary tax. You can, one could simplify, right? And in the sustainability statements, it's usually a little bit different because you have narrative disclosures that are statements per se. So those are not explanatory information to the to the numerical items, for instance, but statements in itself. And that's also why the narrative disclosures are a key concept of the of the ESRS disclosures. Well, if you go for the next slide, you can also see that we are preparing tagged illustrative reports. Those are mainly for technical reasons. So we are not really writing real reports. We are just testing our own taxonomy. And here you can see a disclosure for the energy consumption, which has some text, nested textbook text, as you can see, but also some numbers on the energy consumption, for instance, below, which are detailed tagged indeed. Yes, so this is a quick overview of the process, how we develop the XBRL taxonomy. It will be put out for public consultations, and I highly recommend and invite you to download it, provide feedback and on it, because that's of course very important to provide feedback. Yeah. Okay, I think we can now stop my presentation. Just a few more words from my personal point of view on the way going forward, also in regard to what Eduardo just mentioned. I think we have seen a lot of use cases of XBRL digital reporting. You can stop presenting, thanks. So far in Europe, and for instance, there are many digital tax reportings, very successful projects based on XBRL. We have the regular reporting with FinRep, CoRep, SRB, and so on, EBA, Solvency II, and now we are getting to a new time of digital sustainability reporting, which is indeed, from my point of view, a little bit like a mixture of the template-based reporting that we have in the regular reporting space and the very free principle-based reporting that we have seen with the IFRS taxonomy. And the ESRS and the Article 8, by the way, as well, because it contains quite extensive reporting, precisely defined reporting templates, are a mixture of both. So the ESRS could be considered as a mixture of principle-based plus rule-based, very granular data points defined in the reporting standard, which is actually a new era of digital reporting. And yeah, I'm very curious how it will evolve in the future. There are from my point of view, I think last year or the year before, I shared a vision in the Context to Europe webinar, and we are not yet there with a vision of digital reporting where we eliminate the paper, like Willem also pointed out. But I think there are a few things that we should focus on, which is, for instance, the block tagging, how this is approached best. And I know that Expert International is preparing a paper right now with use cases for analysts that should be considered carefully. We need to fine-tune expert taxonomies and the tagging rules, I think, in order to improve things. And we need to make the information available in a timely manner. That's very important for the analysts, so that the digital reports are available without any delay, which will hopefully the ESAP solve. Last but not least, digital signatures, digital signing of the document is, of course, the last missing piece, because you can, if you can't sign digitally the report itself, it's not a complete full process, from my point of view. So this is also an area where Expert International is working on. And we need to close the gap that we have currently between the preparers that actually have quite complex digital systems to calculate the numbers, to prepare the reports, but then it's printed and the analysts might just read it and type it into the databases as well. And we have to close the gap, and I think that's very important. And those are just a few thoughts for the webinar. Looking forward to the questions then.
Thank you so much, Richard, for your very elaborate and insightful view under the hood of what's happening at EFRAG. I know many of the participants of this webinar are actively following you and what's going on in EFRAG, and this really helps us in getting abreast of what is yet to come. And incidentally, in your closing comments, you I think touched upon many of the key aspects of digital reporting and the upcoming events. So I hope that we will continue that in the panel discussion. I'll now hand over to Bruno Tenier, the chair of ex-Bureau Europe, on the impact of CSRD on corporate reporting. Bruno?
Thank you, Willem. Pleased to be here with you this afternoon to discuss about digital reporting and also provide you with some inside information about what we're doing at ex-Bureau Europe. First, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. Just to give a wider perspective on what we are currently doing with digitalization, I would like to outline the decision which been made at the European Council meeting, the meeting where the head of the European states are gathering. And the last one in March 2023 had a very interesting call in the context of the long-term competitiveness of the EU, and also what the Council is talking about growth enhancing regulatory environments. And the fact that the European Council is putting pressure for increasing the uptake of digital solution is, I think, important, because that proves how relevant it is what we are currently doing with digital reporting. Eduardo has already mentioned ESMA, corporate reporting enforcement and regulatory reports, and the outcome of the regulatory activities that ESMA and the other regulatory authorities in Europe are conducting. For me, I mean, it was the result from the 2022 filing, the first year of the ESEF filing, and to me the key point there is that the wider community, including the issuers indeed, but also the software community, the auditors, the regulators as well, we did manage to have this ESEF reporting working. I think that's important. We know that there's a number of things that can be improved, and this is a long way before we can say everything is perfect and perfectly done. But I think it's important that for this first year of implementation, just after COVID, we do as a community manage to make it working. Now there is a new challenge in front of us, the CSRD directive. It means that a much wider number of issuers are going to have to report in the coming few years on CSRD information. Not only listed issuers which are familiar with the SF reporting framework, but also with a number of entities which are non-listed entities, which are important entities as well, and which will have also to cope with this new regulation. And as we managed to see that 2022, the market managed to implement correctly ESEF, I'm confident that we'll be able also to implement CSRD in the coming years. Next slide, please. But to make it work, and what we can call as well the quality challenge, I think there is 4 pillars. The first one is indeed the regulation. The regulation is in place, it's working. Probably could be improved, but at least there is the yearly RTS requirements which are being updated by ESMA. This is the first important element to make it work. What's important as well is the best practices, and that's where the organization like XBRL Europe and also other XBRL organizations in Europe are working to facilitate the development of the best practices. You will see on the slide some links with some of the best practices which we have been publishing. This is the opportunity for us as an organization to have gathering not only of members of the XBRL Europe organization, but also the issuers community, the regulatory community, the software community, and we are working together in order to facilitate the implementation of those regulations, and we are going to continue to do that with CSRD. Indeed, audit is important. I'll come back in a minute on that, and the enforcement, because the enforcement of the regulators is also an important strong point to ensure that the market is progressing towards better quality. Next slide, please. So I'm also an auditor, and I think it's something that needs also to be discussed, the challenge for the auditors. We have some audit regulations, auditing standards in Europe. You might be familiar or not that the AWSB, the International Auditing Standards Board, is currently working on its work plan and asking the question to the market whether some specific auditing standards should be developed for XBRL. As you can imagine, I'm strongly in favor of that. But to me, what's important is to recognize first that now financial and non-financial reports, so the financial and CSRD reports, are or will be digital objects. They are no longer a paper-based document, but they are a series of electronic files. And both the human readable and the machine readable versions of those financial and non-financial reporting should convey an equivalent level of assurance. That's, I think, important that we consider that the human readable, I mean, the former paper-based financial statements, but also the machine readable, the electronic and digital version of it, needs to have the same level of assurance. And to me, it means that the auditing standards will need to integrate the fact that financial and non-financial reporting are now digital. And this is not about, to me, developing a new standard about XBRL. It's much more to integrate the consequences of digitalization of financial statement within the existing auditing standards, both for planning, execution, but also on reporting. A long way to go still, because we know that we've got some positions in Europe, nothing for the moment at international level. So there are still a number of hard work to do before we can get there. But I think we, as an auditors community, we should strongly support the fact that auditing standards become so that they integrate the digitalization of financial statements. And as Richard has mentioned, the audit reports needs also to be digitally signed and as well to be digitalized themselves. Digital signature is very important for us as auditors because it means that we can protect our audit opinion, make sure that the audit report is not being modified, or that the financial statements or the non-financial reporting that we are on which we are providing an audit opinion is the original one and not the fake copy of it. So that's an important challenge as well for us in the future. So I'm sure that we have some interesting years going forward. With digitalization, it's here to stay. We need to improve quality, and we as auditors, I think, have a lot of things to do in order to contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Bruno, for your good and concise overview of the role of accountancy, of XBRL Europe. I think XBRL Europe plays a very specialized but important role in this environment, in that it spans the gap between the various other stakeholders, and especially discussion about the standards, but also on the digital signatures. I think there's a role to play for XBRL Europe also in the coming years. So I wish you good luck with that, and I hope we'll see you at the table. But thank you for now for the discussion, and I look forward to seeing you in the panel. We now go to the last speaker, last but not least. Francesca, you will tell something about your experiences in auditing ESEF and the insights you gained from that.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I think I can link into all the discussions and feedbacks and insights that have been shared till now, because I recognize most of the work we've done on an operational standpoint. So if we go to the next slide, what I would like to share with you is what we looked at as auditors, but also as observers of the market, working with clients, working with different, let's say, industries. So here I try to cover corporate banking and insurance sectors to understand what we've seen, what we have observed, and what we have analyzed as auditors so far. So we had, I mean, in different countries and jurisdictions, there have been lots of roundtables involving regulators, corporates, companies, banking, insurance association, starting from 2020. And the aim of most of the roundtables was actually to find a common practice in interpretation of the ESEF legislative framework and taxonomy, trying to make the corporates themselves more comparable as possible in the tagging and in this digital work and effort they are making to be compliant from one end, and to be also costly efficient in their internal processes and governance. And so they made it in terms that they tried to be compliant. And although at the beginning everyone in the market was quite reluctant of being on time applying such new regulation, then most of them, but I would say all of them, have tried to be compliant as much as possible. The first set of ESEF tags in some countries have depended, it has been a bit a delay start because they tended to wait until the financial statement closing. But especially in the financial sector, so main banks and insurance companies started ESEF implementation in the first mid-2021. Whereas corporates have started a bit earlier than the financial sector, also because they had some regulation that forced them to use this type of tags, although the regulation was not the same. And in terms of notes of the financial statement, we have observed as well, especially in the financial sector, that they started in mid-2022. So I would say not an early start, but at the end they made to be on time with the issuance of the ESEF financial statement. And so also for the notes. I suppose for audit challenges and Bruno and also the other speakers and presenters have already highlighted such points, but external auditors have made specific checks on financial statement prepared according to ESEF, using some specific tools that were available on the market, or they implemented specific tools to understand if there were technical errors, misleading information, machine readability, and other tools also to identify differences between mapping shared with regulators and mapping used by the single financial institution or by the single corporate. I'm talking about financial institutions here because I'm more confident with them, because I'm working with them as auditors and consultants, but I suppose it's the same for corporates. We have analyzed financial statement using the all the details that the market developed, and also with the roundtables and discussion with the regulators. In some countries, some jurisdictions, they have reached a conclusion to trying to homogenize the interpretation of the ESEF tagging and taxonomy. And so especially for financial sector, in certain jurisdictions, they have fixed schemes and fixed tables of the notes. And so it was easier to find a common share practice. But in other countries, comparability have been quite challenging because, of course, interpretation, but also because different tools and digital machines have been used in different corporates and financial institutions. As with regards to the machine readability, we have had a very challenging moment because, especially at the very end of our audit, because in certain jurisdictions we found out that the providers, the IT providers that were, giving access by license to the financial institutions and corporates to their tools for the ESEF compliance didn't reach the machine readability as it was within the regulation and as regulators have recommended to achieve. And so here we see a very specific point of development that needs to be made in the next few months and years, because as auditors in certain jurisdictions, we have even included in our statement a sentence saying that when extracted from HTML format in XBRL instance, due to some technical issues, the machine readability was not in compliance with what required within the consolidated financial statement. So we hope that in the next future, this issue will be solved, and so it will be clear for everyone and accessible for everyone, also the compliance to the machine readability in addition to the human readability. If we go to the next slide, I just summarize very quickly those 7 points. As I said, in certain countries, the common baseline, especially in financial services, as I said, we've seen that we have reached a comparability of the different ESEF statements, ESEF tagging. For certain sector, we didn't, and we observed that has not been reached such a unique ESEF tag mapping for all corporates and all industries, and so comparability is less achievable. Whereas another point that I wanted to highlight to you is also that in some cases we have had some issues in auditing certain tags, especially in the notes. We've seen that there were some issue in terms of signs and in terms of especially the monster tag that it was in 2021 taxonomy for the one that adopted such taxonomy, and so it was very difficult to understand if it was compliant or not compliant, such type of tagging and taxonomy. And so it was a lot of discussion. So it has not been, reading the regulation and then applying on from an operational point of view, but it was lots of discussion with regulators, interpretation, industry sectors that were not on the same page at the beginning of such a transitional implementation period. Then some providers we've seen that have struggled to apply more than a certain number of tags on the same section of the consolidated financial statements due to the IT provider constraints, because of course these regulations have been such a, in a short time frame to be developed that some constraints have been faced also for the tools, the digital machines that were available in the market and in certain jurisdictions. So we have also prepared some papers as auditors, but also users have prepared some papers to highlight the IT issues that have been encountered during the implementation of the ESEF. And so we hope that also regulators will take those papers into account. So also in the post-implementation analysis that we heard today have started already. And so also for IT providers and association to discuss what's the future and how can ESEF be used for the next projects that we've seen will happen in the future, such as the CSRD. Also, we've noticed Board of Directors approved the financial statement prepared according to the ESEF format, but based on the preparation and the readiness of the corporates or financial institutions that have applied such regulation, Board of Directors have faced also the challenge on how to really sign off such financial statement, some digital financial statements, and so based on readiness, they feared that they weren't prepared enough. But at the end, all preparers and users managed to comply with the regulations. And last slides, and then my colleague will open the floor for questions. Here, I try to represent the timing, the impact of such regulation in 4 points, and the remedial action we see in terms of timing of preparation of the ESEF financial statement, especially for resubmission. What Eduardo was saying is actually an issue also for auditors, because I agree with Bruno, we need to go into the direction of digital audit, and as auditor, and part as audit firm, our effort and investments are really huge in terms of becoming digital audit firms. And so, but at the same time, we need to have the counterparty that really has a more user-friendly type of tools and to be audited, because every time that there is a modification, an adjustment, or an error has been found, the process of audit will start again. So although digital, on a digital mode has been quite challenging. Then other three, missing incorrect tagging. Then we've seen the machine readability together. And also some differences that we've seen in jurisdiction that are not English speaker as the main tongue, main language. We've seen that also the timing of auditing, but also timing of preparation is doubled. So it needs to be taken into account also for a fast closing type of financial statement process. This is pretty much what I wanted to highlight today. So I pass to Harun, I suppose, or Willem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca, for this very interesting, insightful overview of what an ASAF 2022 audit entails, and especially the call for action, I think, to the different stakeholders is something that we can pick up in the panel discussion. Also, because I think you rightly highlighted that we are not doing this in splendid isolation. This is one big reporting chain, in which means that we're all dependent on each other. So we all need to play our roles, and we need to identify and highlight any issues in the chain for the whole chain to improve. So I think, Harun, it's now time for our panel, to start the panel. And I think you already put the Slido code on the screen, in which you can, as participants, enter any comments or remarks for us to pick up either within the panel or afterwards, but preferably for the panel now. To kick off the panel discussion, in which all the previous presenters will take part, a brief recap of the big overriding, the overarching structure here. Again, the three components of ESAF, CSRD, and ESAP interacting with actions and insights and issues which touch us all as auditors, but also as report providers and other stakeholders. I heard quality of taxonomy. I heard quality of the standards important. I heard digital signature sign-off as important. I heard the role of the auditor to make sure that they are able to provide the assurance that society requires. What I also heard, I think, is many lessons learned over the past years, especially on the back of ASAF audits, but also having a first look at CSRD and developing, as Richard rightly explained, the ESRSs. These lessons learned, I think, are best translated into best practices, so that we can all learn from what works, but also the issues that have been highlighted, that Francesca mentioned some of that. I think the trick for us all is now to integrate that into either the software, the standards, the taxonomy, and or the methodology that we apply on a day-to-day basis. But it's still early days, and we have to find the balance between all these aspects. And that's why we reserved quite some time for a panel discussion here, because it's nice to hear from the experts on their own domain. But as I mentioned before, in digital reporting, everything connects to everything, and everything is dependent on everything. So the best value, in my experience, is from a discussion with all the knowledgeable people in this call. So Harun, may I ask you to come up with the first question from the participants?
Sure. There are many questions, but so the participants can like the questions, so I will be sharing the most popular ones. And I think we can start with, where are these reports type of questions? So how can we find these? And I think European Single Access Point comes into the picture. So if anyone wants to share any views on this.
Well, I can pick up, but Eduardo and Richard, I think you also have something to say on ASAP, but ASAP is not yet there. It's something that is an intention, a stated intention of the Commission, and it will be there. But right now, many of the digital reports are still in national repositories or with supranational supervisory bodies. What is interesting also, but I think Bruno, maybe you can say something about it. XBRL International built this ad hoc repository of ESEF reports, which is interesting. Maybe you can share that link in the bio, or maybe afterwards in the slides. But right now it's really, let's say, localized, and it's not centralized yet, it's decentralized. But Richard, Arnd, or Eduardo, can you say something about ESAP in that respect? What do you expect?
That the ESAP is still in the negotiation, so the legislation has not been adopted yet. So it still needs to be adopted, published in the official journal, and then you need to develop. ESMA will need, the Joint Committee, the ESA's Joint Committee needs to develop the implementation technical standards. Yeah. So it's highly likely that until 2026, 2027, yes, will not be in place.
So for the time being, we are stuck with the decentralized repositories. Maybe Richard, you can add something to the discussion, or?
Well, I mean, indeed, yeah. In each of the EU countries, there's a so-called official appointed mechanism. Usually, it's some kind of business registrar or organization that is collecting and distributing the ESEF reports. And unfortunately, you have no other choice than going manually to those web pages and try to find the reports. There is, for instance, a repository on filings.xbrl.org. It's from xbrl.org, but covering only several countries, not all EU countries, with publicly available XBRL reports that you can use to get an impression. But indeed, it's a good. It's really, the ESAP comes in quite handy, I guess, because it's not guaranteed that the files will be at those public platforms and that they will be at a timely manner, which is also very important when we compare that to the US, for instance, where the filer is submitting a report and then it's directly a few minutes later published for all the investors for download. Yeah, I think that would be the ideal world. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I think it's clear that the need for something like ASAP is really there. And as Accountancy Europe, we have responded positively to that in a supportive manner. So we really need something like that. But having said that, we also made some comments to the Commission about what we think are prerequisites for ASAP to work. So, and I think also as participants, as we all hear from the profession, we need to keep engaging there, because at the end of the day, we support the policy objectives, but it needs to work in practice. So I think for now is, I think, a good, let's keep it at that, the answer. Harun, maybe.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And the second question, the second group of questions are about the taxonomy. So there will be taxonomy. EFRAG will do some consultation, but I see from the questions, I think there is need to clarify the process. What will EFRAG do, ESMA do, and the Commission will do, and the timelines, if possible.
Yeah, the due process. Maybe that's something for Richard and maybe Eduardo to answer.
Maybe Eduardo goes first, and I will extend. Okay.
No, so it was, I was trying to be a bit of what is in the timeline. So how we work, it will be something similar with IFRS. So in this case, EFRAG develops the XBRL taxonomy. It is delivered to ESMA, and ESMA will include this in the SFRTS to make it mandatory. So ESMA will perform as well a consultation regarding the CSRD, where we will discuss the policy approach, whether integrate it into one report or two reports, a public consultation on different topics, and then we deliver to the Commission. The Commission is when they launch the endorsement process, which is like we are doing, it's the same that we are doing with the CSRD. So the Commission launched the endorsement process, that is adoption first by the Commission and a scrutiny period of 3 months by the Parliament and the Council. And then it's adopted.
Okay.
Right, and the ESRS, just to add, that is the ESRS sustainability statements are supposed to be part of the management report. So this management report is in some countries already part of the ESEF document, which means it's usually not tagged, for instance, in Germany, but is already part of the XHTML document. And in that case, it means that it is indeed one report where multiple taxonomies all together bundled in the ESEF taxonomy. I guess this is how it will finally look like. Need to be used in that report. Yeah. As well as the Article 8 disclosures. By the way, the Article 8 disclosures are already mandatory as of now. We have seen the first reports for non-financial institutions available. So if you look at the company's annual financial reports or even ESEF reports, you might find the Article 8 disclosures, CAPEX, OPEX, and so on activities. Even I've seen it in ESEF reports already, but not tagged. Yeah? And this is then also possible in the future with the Article 8 taxonomy. The non-financial institutions, so the bank, asset managers, and so on, they did not report yet. They are not mandated. Yeah. They have 1 more year.
Richard, interesting. Just going back on your Article 8 discussion, do you have any feeling or sense or indication about the timelines, what we can expect for electronic tagging of Article 8 information? Is there anything that you can share with us now that you know or expect?
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of EFRAG. I can only say that that our job is to develop the XBRL taxonomy and then hand it over to the European Commission and to ESMA, and then it's actually then the whole legal process that Eduardo just explained need to be started to transform it into a legislation. And I don't know how long that will take and when the actual tagging will be mandatory then. Yeah, but our goal is to let's say as soon as possible deliver the XBRL taxonomy to ESMA and the European Commission. But we are not done yet. We are still working on it. We are on a good way to have it finalized soon, or at least the draft that goes out for consultation. But I cannot unfortunately say more about the timeline.
Oh, I understand that, but you're already working on that. That was basically what my
absolutely.
Okay, so
So the XBRL taxonomy is kind of implemented. EFRAG is also doing that with the help of external consultants. And right now we are doing the internal review. So each and every data point needs to be reviewed, every tag, if it's actually correctly representing the human readable standard. And this is what we are doing right now. And then, of course, it needs to be approved by the EFRAG boards, and which is also a process before it's handed over.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Harun.
Okay.
Sorry, Eduardo.
The idea we have is to pack everything in one, just to advance in the process. Because otherwise, we need to incorporate as well the Article 8 taxonomy into ESEF. So instead of doing 2 processes, we will wait a bit and we will pack everything in one process.
Okay, good. You will wait for both aspects to be incorporated. Okay, good. Yeah, interesting. Harun.
Okay, and I see a few questions around the form of filing. So will there be one digital file for sustainability information and another for financial information? This is the first part of questions. And second part, they refer to the financial statements are done in PDF, but also in digital files. So is it going to be the same for sustainability? So we will see separate sustainability reports on their website in PDF maybe, and then digital files too. So there are 2 questions about the form of filing.
Maybe I can go first, and Eduardo, you correct me if I'm wrong, okay? So first of all, I think I saw the comment as well with the PDF, and I'm not quite sure if this is actually the process as it has been intended to be. I think ideally there's only one report, which is the ESEF single European electronic format. I know that in some countries, for instance, like in Germany, you still have the paper-based official version, but I'm not sure if this is actually still possible with the new CSRD. And yeah, so let's assume that there's only one report. And yeah, and regarding the question if it's multiple documents or not, my assumption is that since the management report is part of the annual financial report, which is supposed to be tagged in the ESEF format, and the ESRS as well as Article 8 are part of this report, it's only one report. If it's only one document, or maybe even multiple documents in one report package, is a detailed question that I cannot answer yet. But from my point of view, it's to be considered one a report which needs to be audited. And by the way, and yeah, it means that we have the notes or the financial statements being tagged, and the notes as well, and the sustainability statements in the same report using two different X-rated taxonomies, or actually with one ESEF X-rated taxonomy. Yeah. That is my understanding, at least.
Eduardo, do you have anything to add to that before I do that? Okay.
Regarding the PDF of the ESEF format, in the ESEF reporting manual, the amendment that we did last year, we made very clear the only valid annual financial report is the one in ESEF report, in ESEF format. Yeah. So if on top of this, people want to do the PDF file, it's up to them, but it is not necessary.
That's the unofficial copy then.
Exactly. And then we recommend it that even if when preparers do this presentation in other formats, they should say, or they should put a disclaimer saying that it's not valid. And if there is any possible contradiction with the ESEF format, the ESEF format has preference to any other format.
Yeah.
So that, in this case, PDF files is up to the preparers to prepare or not.
Yeah, I think that's I think the common understanding now, also with Accountancy Europe and her member bodies, is that the discussion about PDF is pretty clear. I mean, that's especially in the listed entity domain, that is an unofficial copy, with of course many implications for if and when you use that on a website. But there's not much discussion about there. Where there is discussion, I think, and that's my personal point of view, but also based on discussions within Accountancy Europe, but also within other countries, is that there is some room for interpretation outside of the listed entity. If you overlay what the CSRD is asking or requiring, ESEF is requiring, and what we expect ESEF not formally requiring but implying, is that there's a distinction between the listed entities and the non-listed entities. For the listed entities, it's pretty clear. There can only be one document, as Eduardo rightly mentioned. There is not much room for interpretation there. Where there is room for interpretation is the large entities which are not listed and therefore not subject to the RTS on ESEF right now. And the way the CSRD is worded leaves some interpretation room for what that means for the one report assumption. And ideally, of course, you would have the same situation for large entities, that there is one report in XHTML format containing both the financial statements and the management report. But if you look at the individual legislation in member countries, that may not always be the case or possible, like, for example, in Germany. So the intention there, I think, is clear, but if you read how it's worded now, there is still some room for interpretation there. So I don't know if any of the other panelists want to comment on that. Bruno, do you have an opinion on there, or the insight from France? Because I know it was discussed there.
Yeah, in France, we've got two documents for the moment, because the financial statements are approved by the board and the ESEF are approved by the general manager. So there is a distinction between the two, but I think that the new CSRD and the change into the 2013 directive, as well as a new reference to the ESEF directive, is going to change that. So at least there will be legal discussions on how these things will have to be changed into the French law, for example. But I mean, I cannot think that we can continue having a document which is a paper document approved by someone and the digital document approved by somebody else being two separate documents. It doesn't make sense at the end.
Maybe Francesca, do you have an opinion on this, or have you not? Is this not a point of discussion in Italy yet?
No, it is absolutely. Actually, the real point of discussion on CSRD is actually this one. So, because now the phase of the CSRD implementation is actually what corporates and financial institutions are doing the first assessments and gap analysis compared to the first set of ESRS. And so this question came up when they had to allocate the budget, really. And so they needed to understand who was responsible and in charge of the budget. It was actually, in general, the board of directors cannot be. And so it was the CFO or who else actually approves and will approve the ESRS. And so in different jurisdictions, for instance, in Italy, because I'm more confident with the Italian regulation, then we have a specific role for whom is in charge on data quality and process and controls that are related to financial statement and is regulated by Bank of Italy and approved by the ECB. And so that person, we think, it will be in charge, and therefore it will be in charge of signing off also the ESRS that will be part of the management report. But then if you talk to other clients in the UK or in France, in Germany, then this role is not set by the regulator. And so is very vague at the moment who's going to be in charge. And there are lots of discussion. I'm aware of few projects actually that very large banking institutions are doing to assess who's best placed in terms of competence and type of tools and also data type of skills to be in charge of such CSRD and ESRS information. So they really want to contribute to the discussion, I understand.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. Maybe we can go to another set of questions, Harun?
Yeah, sure. And very much linked to the discussion that we had now about digital signatures. And if we find who is responsible for signing ESF or CSRD reports, so how are they going to do it? And there are references to XBRL consultation. I think it's a recent consultation. Francesca already mentioned the board of directors having this issue. So, well.
Yeah, again, there I think, and that's one of the reasons that we include ESAP, the European Single Access Point, in this discussion, because if you want to have something like ESAP, even if the reports themselves are not machine readable, you still want to be able to assess the authenticity of the reports. And one of the ways you can do that is by signing them. But even in the ESAP domain, there's a lot of discussion about the way that we are signing off opinions now, just putting the text in the reports. Whereas, from an auditor point of view, you may want to have a separate opinion that you sign off and then link to the report. And I see Bruno nodding. So maybe Bruno, you can kick off this discussion, because there are many different angles to this discussion, but that we need something in the domain of digital signatures and to the definition of the roles of the people that sign off. I think that's clear. But Bruno?
I think we need to recognize that what we've got in Europe for the moment is not satisfactorily designed, because when you look at the US, in the US, you've got the Edgar database. You can go and call those reports from the Edgar database. Indeed, you don't have digital signature, but you know that there are some processes, both at the issuer's side, to ensure that the document which is being filed is the good document, the right document. At the same time, you rely on the SEC security system so that if there is a problem on the document, if the document is being changed afterwards, it's quite unlikely, because that would mean that the SEC security system would have failed. In Europe, we need to have digital signature first for security reasons, because I can get a document, I don't know where this document is coming from. It can come from hundreds of different websites, because this is from the company's website. Or it can come from 27 different organizations in Europe.
OEMs, yes.
The OEM, where the things are being located. And then I need to rely on those OEMs, which I don't know, because it's very difficult to know which OEM is effectively working in Austria, in Italy, in France, in all those countries. So it's very difficult to know where to look at those files. And when you get the files, you're lucky if the files is working perfectly, in the sense that it's not being modified. And on top of that, you've got the difficulties of the lack of having a viewer to view the files, because when you look at those something different with the digital signature, but the lack of viewer is an issue as well. That has been solved in the US with the SEC EDGAR database, where you've got the viewer. But I think we've got an issue in Europe, because it's difficult to find the files, you cannot read the files, and you are unsure, because of the lack of digital signature or good process to ensure that the files have not been modified. So this is what ESA can start solving part of the problem, but we need still, I think, to get the digital signature in the ESA filing to make sure that they have not been modified.
But first of all, I think, Bruno, we need to have a discussion about the roles that you that were mentioned earlier. Who's having which roles? I mean, is the board going to sign off on their own financial statements, which they are now not doing electronically, and the auditor is to a certain extent? I think in the future that cannot be. I think both the board must sign electronically and the auditor must sign electronically, because these files, like you rightly mentioned, they will float around in Europe by the mere fact that we are not a centralized, federalized system. We have a decentralized infrastructure right now. So you need to have the mechanism to be able, if you get a file as a stakeholder, to verify that it was actually the file that was officially adopted by the entity, but also the file that was actually seen by the auditor when he or she gave his or her opinion. But any other views from the other participants?
Well, just to add on your point, if you go back to the Article 59 of the CSRD directive, then you will see that there is a clear responsibility from the board to approve not only the paper document, but the ESEF document as well. And if you start from there, from this article and the changes that it implies to some of the directives, including the 2013 directives and also the 2019 directive on ESEF, then I think you've got the solution. It's the responsibility of the board, and if the board can earn the responsibility, it should sign. No more on paper, but digitally.
No, I mean, that is clear, Bruno, but I mean, there is currently no EU-wide understanding about how the board can do that electronically. That needs.
Well, I mean, from a technical point of view, maybe I can jump in here. It's of course an interesting question, who is in the end signing what, but what we are from IXRA International, since I'm also a member of the IXRA Standards Boards, we approved 1 or 2 weeks ago a document that we can also provide to you, our specification of requirements for the digital signatures. So IXRA International is working on something that is not the solution yet, how to actually do all those different things, but we are collecting the requirements and we have approved the requirements document. And for instance, it must be possible to sign only different parts of the reports. So an auditor will probably in the future not make a general auditor's opinion on the whole report, especially if it also has ESG related matters, where it's unclear if it's actually the same auditor that is doing the auditor opinion. Yeah, so we might have different requirements. Where we say this section is approved by the board, this one is approved by auditor A, and this section is approved by auditor B, and then even this single fact is only approved by whoever wants to approve as well, or must approve as well. And so we are collecting those requirements and also to check, for instance, the signatures, to make it possible for humans in the end to see the report and click a button and see, well, I can see this fact, this expert tag is actually signed by X, Y, Z, and I can prove that, yeah? Or for instance, that the document has not been changed after the digital signature. So those are the requirements we are collecting, and Expert International is developing a specification, or specifications, multiple maybe even, to cover that, then to provide a solution to do that. Yeah. Unfortunately, that means right now it's impossible to do that, or at least not in a standardized
not
way.
A standardized way, Richard. It is possible. You know, in the Netherlands, we have done that for years, but that's a specific Netherlands interpretation of certain standards. What we need is an EU-wide agreement on how to apply those standards. And I've seen the draft, and it really looks nice. And I also see some Dutch influences in there, which is good, because it would be odd if we did something completely off the chart. But it's especially the EU-wide development and adoption of this is how we are going to do it, because there are currently many different ways. And if we want to have an EU-wide playing field, which we need for, at the very least, a Green Deal to work, then we also need some agreement on this. Harun, do you think this is enough for this topic? Because I think there are many different other topics to be discussed by the panelists.
Yes, another one is about block tagging. So it was difficult for auditors and preparers, and there will be some narrative also information in sustainability reports. So how to deal with them, or will there be any change in reporting manual or expectations? Several angles really, but the main theme is block tagging and narrative.
Yeah, but there was a very specific one about that it was hard, Harun.
Yeah, it was hard. So is it going to be hard also for?
So basically, I think the question was, is it going to be as hard block tagging the ESRS as it has been for ESEF? Wasn't that basically the question?
Yeah.
I think that's something for Richard and for Francesca that they can comment on, but maybe Eduardo.
If you want me to start, I would say yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you talk about block tagging of notes, means that you are making a decision, you know, a decision of what to tag and what to tag together, and if it makes sense, you know, in an operational really sense. And so I think it will be difficult anyway, because also reading the ESRS, also in my role in the reporting board of EFRAG, I've seen that there is lots of room for interpretations, and lots of work have been done by the sustainability reporting board and the staff. And so you'll see that there are examples, there is enough details to make this choice. But of course, block tagging of notes is difficult. And I think a big role in this have been asked also to ESMA to take, you know, Eduardo as well. So I think in the past few months, I'm sure you have received many questions on the block tagging of notes, and probably you receive it at a stage where it was too late to make any decision or statement or letter to the preparers. But I think here I raise a little bit the tone. So if you're going to play a role also in the block tagging of notes for the CSRD for the ESRS, probably is really good that, as you said, you are working together with EFRAG, because I think we need to make it a bit easier for user to understand if they are making the right decision and how to apply the block tagging of notes.
And especially, if I may add to that, Francesca, since with financial statements, block tagging, you have a structure that you can basically, that supports you, because the block tagging relates to the financial statements. So they're being also they always relate to something financial. But with the ESRS, some of these statements, or many of these statements, they stand well, I would say in splendid isolation, that's not true, but they don't rely on the structure of the financial statements. They are statements unto themselves. So maybe Richard, you can say something about that, because there is an architectural difference between the ESRSs and the ESEF taxonomy that has an impact on how users perceive them in practice, making reports. Can you say something about that, Richard, maybe? Because you're closest to that.
Yes, sure. Actually, the text block tagging is one of the areas where I have been spending hundreds of hours in the last months to actually, to define a strategy and to find ways how it could work and to think about approaches. And I think I must agree, because I know it from my previous professional life, that the block tagging, the last year block tagging, or the ESEF block tagging, was probably a combination or concatenation of some unlucky circumstances that made it hard. Yeah. So first of all, let's start, for instance, with the taxonomy itself. Yeah, it's interesting. Francesca, you have mentioned monster tag. I don't know if I was the one who invented the term or if it was somebody else, but it's common phrase now that there are indeed monster tags in text block tagging, and that they're probably not very helpful. Yeah, so that was one thing. So the taxonomy, and then of course, I have the feeling that for the financial statements, to notice the financial statements, there is a divergence from the taxonomy to the reports itself. The reports have been written and stated since many years, and the text block tagging came then just after 10 years after companies actually doing this. And the taxonomy is not, in some cases, that's my feeling, some preparers might confirm, is not actually reflecting the structure of the reports that we might have today. And now the question is, which one is wrong, the report or the taxonomy or both? It just fits not very well together. That's why you need to use a lot of continuations and a lot of overlapping tags and nested tags. Then we had the list of fixed tags, which caused a lot of confusion. Do I need to tag all of them? What is it? What if I don't disclose it? Do I still need to tag it or not? That were some questions that we had. Now, to provide some answers on the ESRS, I can tell you that when ESRS reports are written for the first time, and when the preparers are looking at the XBRL taxonomy while they draft their statements, the narrative statements, it will be way easier to tag it as when they are not taking care of the XBRL taxonomy and just outsourcing the XBRL taxonomy tagging maybe at the very end of the process. So the closer you are structuring the ESRS report to the actual standard, which is the XBRL taxonomy. The XBRL taxonomy is nothing else than the standard itself. The easier it will be to do the tagging. Yeah, this is also the level of separation that we have described in our paper, where if you mix certain things together, or if you scatter, if you do the vice versa, is scattering around disclosure across the report instead of having it in one place, then of course the tagging will be more complex. That's why I think for those companies that have the chance to set up a new ESRS report, it will be not such a challenge. It will still be, of course, a massive report, but it will not be such a challenge.
Are you calling then, Richard, for integrated reporting? Because that is what you implicitly do then, that you say don't split it up into, say, a traditional reporting process and do the tagging afterwards, but integrate it.
No, I wouldn't call it integrated reporting. I would rather call it more taxonomy-centric or
using the taxonomy
structured report. So
as a template.
Yeah,
report.
Exactly. Okay. Yes. So this is exactly the purpose. Also, what we are at EFRAG are promoting, to use the XBRL taxonomy as kind of a template. Yeah. So we will also publish the tagged illustrative reports, which will just be a sample. Yeah. It's nothing that the companies should just simply take and fill out. But in the end, we are getting closer there, because the better the report is structured and the smaller the narrative disclosures are for the users, the more comparable are they. Just imagine if you have a few sentences on a single text block tag. It is of course providing way more is way more usable for the users is if you have a monster tag where you have a few hundred pages in one tag.
Yeah, that doesn't help you. No.
Exactly. So, and there we need to find the right balance, yeah, to enable the users to get the most granular information they need, the narrative information. At the same time, avoid burdens with overlapping and too much overlapping and nested text. Yeah. That's my that's my opinion on that. And by the way, we are working on a document on XBRL international level where we describe the use cases of text block tagging from analyst perspective, because I think this is also interesting. I think many people just had wrong assumption what is possible with a block tagging from a user's perspective. Because the XBRL specification itself does not provide any guidance on how the data is to be extracted and how it's to be used and what is actually possible with it. Yeah. So, and that gap we hope we will fill in the future together with a list of technical requirements that need to apply to enable certain use cases for block tagging. Yeah. For instance, disclosure checklist is quite easy with block tagging. Yeah. To know that a disclosure exists in the report with text block tagging is quite easy. You don't need to extract, yeah, as well as the navigation in the human readable report when you just jump to a certain fact in the report. Yeah. But then when we go into the text analysis, for instance, then it's getting more complex, and we might have different requirements on the technical approaches that needs to be applied on those reports. Yeah.
But I think we will go to the same process as with ESEF. We first need to learn the lessons in practice and then try to translate it into best practices and then improve the cycle. But given that the fact that CSRD is on top of an existing requirement, I think, Francesca, your clients are having one hell of a task ahead of them. Because, of course, it's nice to say that use the ESRS as a template for reporting, but many of our clients, your clients, already have reporting processes in place. So how do you see this block tagging? Is there anything we can do, should do, must do, or warnings that you have for that, insights?
I would leave the floor to Eduardo and Bruno that had the hands on, and then I go. Okay.
Eduardo.
Bruno was before me, but
very, very quickly, just would like to concur on what Richard has been saying. And we need to remind that block tagging came into the ESEF regulation at a point where many companies were opposing the legislation and also where they were asking for simplification. And block tagging has been seen as a simplification as compared to what was going on in the US. Nobody looked at block tagging on the first 2 years because we had COVID and then we had the first year implementation. So it was not one of the priority. But I think we need also, as Richard said, question ourselves whether it's useful or not in the context of financial statements where there is a large number of data points. And I fully agree with Richard that block tagging will be useful for CSRD, but I've got a very strong question mark for financial statements, whether it's the right way to go forward.
Now, Eduardo.
I think that it was very good to give the floor to Bruno because it's what I was going to say. So the decision of the ESEF in 2018, it was this, a political agreement due to the opposition of using detailed tagging in the notes. So for the entities. So it was considered it was the best approach at this time because it was a relief for the companies. Now is what I was saying before in my presentation. It's time maybe to gather all this experience because this is the first year, 2022 was the first year of experience, is when people have started to use it. Until then, nobody has anything. After 4 years, nobody was saying anything. And now is when we are gathering this information. And we will need to see how can be improved or what needs to improve and how we can align with the sustainability taxonomy, because we will need to incorporate this as well. So it's going to be, this is a continuous process, learning process.
Thank you, Eduardo.
Yeah, I totally agree. What I can say, I totally agree with Eduardo and with Bruno. So this is my point as well.
Okay, I think we've sufficiently answered this question for now, at least for in the context. I think these are insights which are really relevant for everybody here. So let's please pick up on that later on. But please move on to the next.
Yes, I think there are two last that we can respond in the time we have. The first one is about involvement of others than financial auditors. So things are getting complex. The IT auditors, or with sustainability, we may have independent assurance service providers. So how do you see this? Maybe starting with Francesca, do you have more IT auditors now in your teams, or how to deal with this complexity?
Yeah, so if I start from the ESEF approach, what we did, first of all, we didn't rely only on external IT providers, but we created as audit firms, and I'm not talking about my firm, but in general, we as auditors, we try to reperform and to interpret the given interpretation to the tagging and the taxonomy and create our internal tool validations. And of course, the audit team is the developed audit team, which means that they are the traditional auditors, but of course there are a selection of people that have data expertise, IT expertise. So when I'm saying IT, I'm talking about digitalization, digital expertise, and also when it will come to the CSRD, all audit firms have already developed experts in terms of the competence, people that have already worked on sustainability space and are following the entire CSRD projects. So they will be involved in the non-financial reporting information from a content standpoint and IT and digital standpoint. So the audit team needs to be seen as a complementary and let's say a different skill set that are this combination is the full audit team. The old and let's say the traditional auditors cannot follow all these regulations with the CSRD, but also ESEF, ESAP, and all the digitalization process that we see and we've seen and we see onwards in all regulation that it will come in the future.
Yeah. Maybe Bruno, you want to add something to this before I have some comments? But
no, it's good for me.
No, okay. I also interpreted the question in another way, Haroon and Francesca, because there was some not discussion. It's explicitly in the regulation that the Commission wants to enable other service providers, audit providers, other than the big 5 or 6 or 7 audit firms, to also be able to provide assurance, at very least on the ESG information. So, and I think that links back to the discussion that we already had on digital signatures and the specifications for that. If you do that properly, and I know it, Richard, it's already in the draft for the standard now, it enables different parts of a report to be signed by different identities, be it auditors or people. So that enables, at the very least, to have, for example, 2 different auditors given their opinion on separate parts of the document. For example, a financial auditor on the financial statements and the disclosure thereby, and another service provider or assurance service provider on the ESRSs. So technically that's possible, but if you say something like that, what I think immediately is that, how about the consistency within that first one report? Because if there's going to be one report which is being sent out to supervisors, to repositories, but also to other stakeholders, I mean, they read one report. How about the consistency between the sustainability part and the financial part if it's being audited by separate parties with their own set of assumptions? I mean, that raises a lot of questions, both for the profession, but also for society. So I think also there's a lot to learn still, and maybe the technical part of that will be the easiest part, but the impact on society and the profession will be as big, I expect. But I don't know if anyone who wants to comment on that, but that's my take on the situation now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Then maybe last question. This digital reporting, can it be used for by companies, like for their KPIs, remuneration, or other risk assessment internally? So can it be useful also for companies themselves?
Well, the short answer is, of course, yes. And that harks maybe a bit back to my comment towards Richard about integrated reporting. I didn't make that comment out of the blue. What you see now, the reporting requirements and the complexity of the reporting requirements increases for organizations. And there will be an increased, I think, let's say, an increased requirement or desire to make the reporting process not only more efficient, but also more effective, so that you can basically safeguard what you need to report. At the end of the day, at the end reporting needs to be high quality. But how do you ensure that if the inputs for that process are not guarded as well? So it makes sense to, for example, embed reporting requirements earlier on in the process, so that you start not only using the various taxonomies for external reporting, compliance reporting, but also for parts of internal reporting, group reporting, for example. There could be a case for that. In how far that is and how quickly that is, that remains to be seen. But I think there will be a drive towards that end, for the very reason that you want to be in control as a company. You need to show to be in control. And the only way to do that is to integrate your reporting process. But maybe Francesca or Richard, you can say something about that, or Bruno. I mean, this is a topic for open discussion, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is the way to be. And I'm also aware that the readiness and the promptness of the different players is really, it varies a lot. So there are, listed companies or very well integrated companies, and with a strong governance, robust processes that are ready to do so, and is not going to be too costly, and it's going to be more efficient to do so. There are others that are less ready to the change, to the transformation. And so they are getting there, but probably they will need more time for this. Although, as I said, I think is the way it should be, and we need to go into that direction.
Arun, I'm looking at the time, and maybe there's one more set of questions or group of questions that we can pick up on.
Or maybe we can have this to the table of final messages, or what's more important for the panelists.
Are there
if
any
you agree with them
that want to make a statement? We're hearing what we've heard so far. Things that you want to give back to the audience based on this discussion? Maybe Richard or Bruno, anything that you think?
I think maybe we can have a tour of the table, and everybody can, for 1 minute, give the last message to the audience. Maybe Eduardo can start as in the original order.
Okay. What I can say is that this is clearly the starting of the journey. I think is the first results seems to be good, but there is still a lot of work to be done for a lot of stakeholders, not only for the XBRL community, for the preparers, issuers, for the auditors. But I think this is the good way of doing it, and I think I'm hopeful that it will be very useful on this information, and we will reach a very good final point.
Yeah.
Can't agree more to you, Eduardo. I think we are on that journey, and my original vision, or my old vision, that we get rid of the paper-based reports and have useful digital tagging and digital reports with the right granularity, with the right data points being digitized and available immediately for the analysts is indeed still my vision, and I really hope and I work on it to become true. For all the audience, my last message is please pay attention to the consultation, public consultation from EFRAG on the ESRS XBRL taxonomy. It will come soon. I cannot give you an exact date now, but we will definitely announce it on the EFRAG webpage and probably on LinkedIn, wherever. Please follow us, and yeah, I invite you to answer that consultation, test the expert taxonomy. Most of the companies now should have tagging tools available, and yeah, we really appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
If I may, I think we can be proud of what we did and what the overall community of issuers, software providers, auditors, and regulators did, and that's the optimistic message. I think it's going to stay. It's not something that's been there just for a moment, and there's still a lot of work to do. I think to me, the future is probably to think more about the users and the users of those information, because that's something that we have not, I think, spent sufficient time to think about. And one final word that I think has been missing into our discussion, that's artificial intelligence, because it's probably going to be the key user of the future. And when thinking about future usage of all this bulk of information, very technical, from financial information to CSRD information, we will need to have the support of artificial intelligence to make full use of it. So I think there's a lot of things to do in the future, and a lot of future challenges, but I'm sure that we can take this opportunity to do more interesting things going forward.
Thank you. Francesca.
My message is that, as you've heard, that this is a financial and non-financial transformation that you are in, and you've been in since all those regulations came in. So time is now. Don't wait, as most of you have waited for the implementation of the first regulation, and indeed in ESEF, because this requires all your competence, attention, and strength and effort of the key areas of the corporate you're in. So time is now. Don't wait till everything will be done, because you need to hear the entire process to ensure that you are going to implement it properly in a robust way, can be audited, and of course will be of a good usage to the users and the analysts.
I couldn't agree more, Francesca. Thank you for that. And if I may wrap this up, Harun, I'll do the wrap up and my own statement in one go. I think we've heard today many different aspects of digital reporting in the EU, based on the various different requirements that there are, but notably ESEF and CSRD, of course, which are front of mind right now. I'm glad that we touched upon many of the aspects that we have learned in the past years. And as both Richard and Pietro mentioned, this is a journey that we're in, and the journey really has only started. I think it's very important, as all stakeholders, that since we are all connected, I mean, it's one reporting chain in which we all have a role to play, that we keep active participation in the various working groups, in the various meetings, to share the lessons that we've learned from our own perspective, so that we can develop both best practices, how do you do things the right way, but also to highlight any issues that we've come across to improve on a continuous basis this whole digital reporting journey that we're in. But in the end, of course, the benefits, both in terms of the policies that we have stated, which are the basis for the regulation, but also there are benefits for users, because if the users don't see the benefits and it's only a compliance issue, it will be difficult. So the call to action that I have from Accountancy Europe is we want to play this active role, and therefore we have this digitalization task force in place. And I would urge you, if you feel the need, or you feel that you have something to share, there's a link in the slides, and if you want to contribute to this journey, as Accountancy Europe, we facilitate that. To that end, we will organize a number of workshops in the coming 1-2 years in which everybody can participate with as goal to highlight the issues, to share lessons learned, and to develop best practices, but also enable us to come up with a good set of recommendations in our discussions with, for example, the various European entities, so that they can get our perspectives to the table and hopefully come to better regulation. Haroon, I think with that, I would like to leave it at that. I would wish everybody a nice day. Thank you for your participation, especially the presenters. Thank you so much for your time, Eduardo, Bruno, Richard, and Francesca, for sharing your thoughts with us and spending time with us. And I look forward to any future discussions with you and meetings. Have a nice day.
Indeed. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.